Are you considering moving to St. John's? Well, there's one thing we have to talk about. Most people who move here for the warm weather, for a healthier lifestyle, because they want to be out and about more. So, one thing to consider is our yards, backyards, front yards, where your house lives, because I bet if you're moving from out of state, you're in for not a rude awakening, but a little bit of a learning curve when it comes to taking care of your yard in St. John's. I'm Caitlin Blosser. I'm a local realtor and mom living in St. John's. So let's dig right in. So, first of all, your first rude awakening is going to be our grass. We have what is called St. Augustine grass. And as my husband likes to say, he used to work on a golf course, it's a weed. The grass, although it is very sturdy, is very high maintenance. So it's like a weed because it's like strands where it'll like attach, root in, root in. So if you start to pull it, it like pulls in like a web type format. So it's great ground coverage. And we used to have two Great Danes. We only have one, and we've never had an issue with it not holding up. Like when we lived in Georgia, our dogs flew through the Bermuda grass. It was constantly getting like all ripped up. They were constantly covered in grass. We had to replace it with zoysia. We moved a couple months later, so I don't know how well they would have done there, but we've never had a problem with traffic on our St. Augustine grass. So it is sturdy, but we call it high maintenance because it needs a lot. We have like our quarterly spray where we've tried True Green has come out and sprayed. My husband's tried to do it himself, which little side note, not a plug, but Scott's Lawn Care actually has an app where you can put in like type of grass you have, where you live, things like that, and it'll send you things to fertilize your grass with. We did that for a couple years, and now we're back to a local company, I think Liquid Lawn, but it does need this. It needs all this extra stuff that I feel like when we lived in Georgia, we just didn't have to deal with. And then it's also high maintenance because it needs a lot of water, but it grows quickly. And one of the biggest things that I think every house, even growing up, I remember my mom complaining about it, is because it's that weed style and kind of that webbing. If you get chinch bugs or like dollar weed in it, it is so hard to get rid of. And with St. Augustine grass, in order to replace it, you have to like cut out the section and lay sod, where I know there's other types of grass where you can just lay seed, kind of put hay on top and watch it grow. St. Augustine, you have to buy the pallets of sod, get the ground all ready, kind of lay it in there, water it a ton before it takes root. So moving on to watering. So in Florida, as you're home shopping, you'll notice almost every home has an irrigation system. If it's an older home, you might be on well water, which is, I'll tell you the pros and cons. It's really good because it's free, right? It's well water. They're digging down a couple 100 feet, pulling water out of a well. So it is at no cost to you. The negative is it smells like sulfur and it can leave like rust colored stains on your sidewalks, on your fencing, on the side of your house. Grew up with a well. Now we have reclaimed water, which almost all the new construction or probably anything built after I'd say probably 2015 is going to be on that reclaimed water. And it's a little expensive. Reclaimed water is just highly treated sewer water that comes back. So you cannot, well, I say highly treated. It's not really highly treated because it's very like, everything's like, don't drink out of it, don't do this. And the pipes outside will be purple so that you know it is reclaimed water and not to digest it. But you do have to pay for it. And because again, St. Augustine grass is very high maintenance, that like there's no cutting the electric bill in the or our JEA bill in the summer because so much of it is our irrigation bill. Now there's ways to help you save with irrigation, but you probably are going to be watering your lawn at least 3 days a week and it needs it. You cannot skip this. So we have what's called a ratio system, which it's like Wi-Fi based. It goes to an app. It helps track if it rained, then it won't water your yard, things like that. So that has helped save us. And JA was actually running a special where if you bought one, you could get a rebate through them. I don't think they're doing that anymore. But that's one way. There's another way to have a separate irrigation meter, which can cost thousands. So I always tell homeowners, you just kind of got to see, like, is it worth it? It's a couple year payoff, but if you plan on being in the home along time, that might be something you can install to save there. So do expect, not only are you going to get an irrigation system, which is great, but it's also going to be an extra cost that you probably didn't have if you're moving from out of state. And then mowing. Again, it's a sturdy grass and it grows quick. In the summer, we're mowing our grass weekly. Sometimes even before the week is up, it's like, oh boy, our grass needs it. And then in the winter, I'd say probably every other week, but it does grow quickly. So like we have to pay to fertilize and do all that. And then we also have a lawn company who comes out because it's just too much for us to maintain with our busy schedules. Now, another shocker when you move, well, maybe depending on where you're moving from, is our lot sizes. In St. John's, most of our lot sizes are under a quarter of an acre. A lot of times you're going to have really small yards. I think builders just got smart and were like, hey, the closer we put houses together, the more houses we can sell in this area. And I think just obviously generational change, kids aren't out as much as they used to be. So lots are smaller here. You can get some great neighborhoods like Mallard Landing, Cunningham Creek Estates, where you can get kind of more of that half an acre to an acre size lot, but they're just not very common here. A lot of times you are going to be on what we call like a little postage stamp, especially if you're in neighborhoods like Nocatee. But most of these neighborhoods who have small lots have great amenities. So although you might not be spending a lot of time in your backyard, you have plenty of community spaces to play and hang out with. So that might be a shock, but it is normal here. Now, in your backyard, let's talk about fencing. So if it's an old neighborhood, a lot of the older neighborhoods still allow the wood, cedar fencing that starts out very pretty in cedar and then over years turns into that gray brown, just your typical wood fencing. Like I think it's 6 foot. But newer homes and even some of the older communities like St. John's Golf, St. John's Forest, things like that, they only allow either white vinyl fencing or the black aluminum fencing. So if it's white vinyl, it's that 6 foot privacy fence. If it's the aluminum, it's like that 4 foot wrought iron fencing. Now, it's neighborhood specific. Like the neighborhood I live in, for example, if you live on the pond, so if you have a water view, in most neighborhoods, if it's water or golf course view, you have to have that black aluminum 4 foot fence. So no privacy in your backyard, and that's just so no views are obstructed of the ponds, golf courses, things like that. If you live on the preserve, though, you can get that white vinyl fencing. St. John's Golf, for example, only allows, no matter whether you back up to a preserve, golf course, or water, you're only going to get that 4 foot fence. Most of Nocatee is the exact same way. Rivertown varies. It's truly neighborhood to neighborhood. So that's something to consider because it's also, whether it's white vinyl or black aluminum, it is a lot more expensive to install than your standard wood paneled fence. Now, backyard use. I'm sure if you're house hunting here, if you haven't started and you need my help, just let me know. But if you've house hunted here, you've probably seen a lot of homes have pools. That's because we love the water. Although we're so close to the ocean, pools are a great way to stay cool, and we get to use our pools year round. Now, right now it is about 40 degrees outside as I'm recording this in January, which we've had a really cold winter that we're not used to, but I'm sure in a week or two we'll turn our pool heater on and be out there. When we lived in Georgia, I know closing your pools was a thing. You shut it down in the fall and then you paid to open it back up in the spring. That is not the case here. They're open year round. And even some of the amenity centers, like I want to say Durban Crossing, their pool's heated. I don't think Julington Creek's is heated, but that's just something to consider. So you're going to use your pool all year long here. So even though we have small yards, you'll see pools in a lot of houses, no matter the size of the yard. That's something very common, no matter what kind of amenities your neighborhood has as well. Now, remember how I talked about the fencing with privacy or no privacy? That's something also to consider about your backyard use. Now, this was a learning curve for me because like I've told you in other videos, we purchased our house sits on a pond. So we have that black aluminum fence, which means everyone can see in our backyard and we can see inside of everyone else's backyard on the pond. We're used to it now and I love it because of all the natural light it lets in. But with that being said, the neighborhood does have say in your backyard. Now, obviously, whether you're on a preserve or a pond, if you want to put a pool in, you have to put it into the ARB, right? You have to get approval for it. But there's a lot of things that we have to get extra approval for or might get denied because we're on the pond and other people can see our backyard. Where if you're on a preserve and you have that white vinyl fence and people can't see what's happening in your backyard, you can probably have gardens galore. You know, you can do whatever you want if other people can't see it. Where on the pond, like I can't have a garden because they're not allowed in my neighborhood and people would see me and report me. So keep that in mind when picking your lot. It was a learning curve at first and I was a little bitter about it, but I've gotten over it and I appreciate it because I also don't want to look at other people's wild backyards because I can see it. So keep that in mind. And again, St. John's is very HOA heavy. So a lot of places where you look are going to have those rules for your backyard. And then talking about lake lots versus preserve, same thing. Keep in mind the fencing, the rules around it, and also think about, I don't want to say bugs because we live in Florida and we have bugs everywhere, but also think about that. Like, for example, on the pond, you might have more, we call them midges. They're like, I think they're considered blind mosquitoes. They don't bite you like mosquitoes do. They're just very annoying, almost like gnats. I have a lot of friends that live on preserve and they seem to have a lot more snakes and wildlife come up to them. A lot of neighborhoods kind of give you those two options, or you can just back up to another home. But a lot of the neighborhoods are designed very strategically to where they'll put the ponds in them for water runoff, and then keep kind of tree buffers around the neighborhood as well. So more than likely, your home is going to back up to one or the other. As I've said before, we picked a pond because every house we went into in our neighborhood that was being built on a preserve, I just felt like it was so dark because our lot sizes are smaller. So we picked the pond because it just seemed so bright and open and airy. There's times I wish we were on the preserve for that privacy, but then I love the natural light we get in at all hours of the day. And like I said, like we have a neighbor who she's on preserve on two sides and she just seems to have the wild wild west over there. She put in like snake vibrators because she's getting so many snakes coming, which who knew that was a thing? I don't know if I'd Google it because who knows what would come up, but it is. They're little things you put in and then they cause a vibration and help keep the wildlife out. She has Rocky the raccoon that comes to visit. She thought it was a boy, but then it had 3 babies. And so she seems to see a lot more wildlife over there. And another thing, although we get the midges and things like that because we're near a body of water with the pond, a lot of preserve is, I don't want to call it wetland because it's not like marsh or things like that, but a lot of where you see trees, if you walk back into it, it's very wet, like inches of water, things like that. So you're going to have a lot of wildlife. Deer is very popular here. My dad lives on the preserve and his next door neighbor has like trail cameras all behind their preserve and they see bears, deer, like the whole shebang. Now the deer, you will see them out kind of at night, but most of the wildlife stays in the preserve because they know it's comfortable. But if you go into neighborhoods like Southampton, you will just see deer on the golf course in the daylight because that's their home and they've gotten so accustomed to it. So that's all I have to tell you today about living in St. John's and understanding the kind of yard you're going. Oh, one more thing I forgot. So one more thing that was a wide, or not a rude awakening, but I became wide-eyed to in Georgia is in Florida, our garden beds are really only mulch. You can get the pine bark nuggets or you can get your standard mulch. Most HOAs allow like brown, black, and red mulch. All the schools, Boy Scout groups always do fundraisers to try to make money by selling you mulch. And because of the Florida sun, something you do have to replace like every 6 months. But we don't have pine straw here. When I moved to Georgia, that was the best thing because it was so cheap and lasted. And again, so cheap, you just brought it back in, looked so fluffy and great, lasted a while, and then you just brought it in again. We don't have pine straw down here. So you will get used to your landscape beds only being mulch. Some neighborhoods allow rock, most don't though, just because keeping up with it, pulling weeds and stuff through it isn't as common or isn't as easy. So they just look rougher a little quicker than mulch does. But yeah, so that is it. So if you're considering moving to St. John's, I'd love the opportunity to work with you and be your realtor. There'll be a link below if you ever want to set up a Zoom appointment. We can connect and see if I'm a good fit for you. If not, I hope you found this valuable because there's a lot to learn about our St. Augustine grass and all the rules that go around with being in a yard in St. John's. So have a great day. Hope to see you soon.